folks. My name is Jim Worthen. The show is Worthen One-on-One. We're here every Monday at 1 o'clock on Channel 17, Cox Cable, Wednesday at 5 o'clock, and Friday at 7 o'clock. I gotta remember these things. We have two platforms we're broadcasting on also. One is TV Santa Barbara's website. You can go to it. There'll be an on-demand area, and you can go down. You have to go all the way to the bottom. I don't know why they make me last, just because my name starts with a W. Worthen One-on-One. You can go to Vimeo and search Worthen One-on-One. I tell you that because you're going to see things that you'll think, oh, I wish my friend in San Ynez, or I wish my friend in Ventura, I wish my relative in Utah could see this. They can. We're international. So there's no copyright, there's no secrecy. We are what we are, and we're proud of it. So tell your friends. My guest this evening or afternoon or whenever you're seeing us, we used to only be on in the evening, is the chairman of the Republican Party of Santa Barbara County. Now that's very important, and we'll get into that after we get by her resume. But she is the chairman of the Republican Party of Santa Barbara County under the state election law. Each, as I say, we'll get into it later, but each party has a code, election law code, that governs them, besides all the other crap that groups have, bylaws and resolutions and stuff. But let's first find out who Bobbi McGinnis is. Bobbi, where were you born?
I was born in Canton, Ohio.
Oh.
Go Bengals.
Ohio. I didn't know. I've only interviewed you 5 or 6 times, and I forgot that. Great state.
Yes, great state.
And what did your parents do?
My parents were immigrants from England. My dad was a mechanical engineer. My mom was a bookkeeper and a housewife. And they came over after World War II, came to America to live the American dream, and they did.
They came right after the war?
They had to wait 3 years to be able to come.
I had my brother-in-law's relatives came over 2 years after the war, and they were just shocked but getting fresh oranges and fresh fruit. England still was not in a lockdown, but they still were on rationing. They still hadn't caught up.
My dad's always said that they came across on the Queen Mary, and it was a rough sea voyage, and he was one of the few people who wasn't impacted by the rough seas. So he said he feasted, made up for all those years of rationing by feasting on the ship with all the goodies that were there.
Well, I shouldn't say this because it might reflect on my real age, which I lie about. I have a souvenir, a little rationing coupon for Jimmy Bruce Worthen from the Second World War.
Wow.
So I think it was so my mother could get extra C's candy or something.
Wow.
And so history's wonderful.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
So you were there. Did you go to school there?
I went there for up until I was in 4th grade, but when we moved to California to come to the Golden State in the 1961.
Where in California?
We moved to Santa Barbara. My dad decided...
So you're really a refugee from
Ohio, the winters of Ohio.
And you're very bright. You never moved back.
Right, exactly.
I've interviewed a few people like Ventnor and others who said, well, we went back for a couple of years, and then Mom realized it was awful cold here.
Yeah, no, my dad made a decision to come out west, and he never looked back.
Yeah.
And he loved being in California. The schools here in Santa Barbara were so great, and there were lots of jobs. And
what did he do?
He was an engineer. So he first worked for a little company. I thought it was called American Research, and he was a draftsman. Yeah, and then he worked for McDonnell Douglas up at Vandenberg Air Force Base, with the most fun job that he had, shooting off rockets into space.
People think that the space boom is in the last few years. No, the space boom at Vandenberg was 48 through 70.
Yeah. And then he eventually started his own business here in town called Pactuco, and basically started it in the garage, and then it grew to be one of the largest exporters in Santa Barbara County.
Yeah, I knew your brother back then. We rode horseback together out in Rancho Embarcadero. I probably met you as a young girl then. And the Pactuco, when I met the first time, and your dad and Mark, your brother, was in a little, not a Quonset, but a Second World War building at the north side of the airport.
And we wondered what kept those buildings up. Was it the buildings sheltering Pactuco, or did Pactuco keep the buildings up with all the machines? That's basically where it started. And
what did your mom do?
And my mom was she was a housewife.
Great. Now Pactuco, as I recall, had something to do with shipping containers and.
It was a plastics manufacturer, which included shipping containers, and also include things for the medical community. And so Pactuco grew up really to service the companies that were growing up here in the Goleta Valley. Burroughs, there was Santa Barbara Research, there was Mosley Research, there was a number of aerospace industries, Circon, which was the...
that's when Goleta went from 5,000 people to 25,000 people.
Right, exactly. And it grew up with that.
And the university went from the old naval base on the hill.
Hire Schulte, Mentor Corporation, those companies, as they established, they needed packaging, and some of the packaging had to be very well engineered and designed to meet certain very high standards. So as Pactuco grew, it became much more sophisticated in the products that it made.
So where did you go to school after you got here at 4 years old or something?
Oh, I was 10, and so I went to Monroe, and then I went to Cold Springs because we moved across town, and then my parents bought a home in Goleta, and we went to Foothill. And my brother went to Foothill, my sister and I went to La Colina during the split, and then Goleta Valley when it was built. And then we went to San Marcos during the split, and then we actually stayed at San Marcos, and others went to DP.
Yeah, a lot of people coming out of, say, LA or San Diego didn't experience. I experienced this in Hayward and Castro Valley, where I started out my freshman year with buddies, and then the next year in football I was tackling them. The new schools.
Because there was so much growth happening so quickly. So La Colina had been built, and then not long after it had been built, all of a sudden they needed another one in Goleta Valley, and it was because of all the engineering companies, and they had a lot of people coming from the Midwest that moved out to California, and it was the Golden State of it was booming, much like we hear about Florida now. California was booming in those days.
We had the good Brown as governor,
yes.
The last good Democrat governor, and although there was some scandals as both parties had, but people forget that we're probably even since the 1960s and the years that the Democrats and the Republicans had the governorship. People forget Deukmejian, Wilson, Schwarzenegger, that there's been a lot of Republican governors since
Reagan. Too. Yeah,
and Reagan beat Brown, who wanted to run for a third term.
Right.
And he was an amateur, an actor, and he was going to blow up the world as governor even. Slander by the Democrats against Republicans isn't new, and
right.
So I remember a commercial when Barry Goldwater ran. I think he was my first vote, and it was a little girl with a daisy and a nuclear bomb going off behind her, and that's what Barry Goldwater was going to lead us into nuclear war and deeper into Vietnam.
Wow.
And of course, nobody has led us into nuclear war, Lord bless us. But his opponent, Johnson, led us into the morass of Vietnam. which Goldwater never would have done. He was a general in the Air Force, and he knew you don't fight a land war in Asia.
Right.
So you graduated from high school, and
went to City College and went to UCSB.
So you weren't one of those crazy people who took out $10,000 back in those days. $10,000 in student loans.
No, I did it the old-fashioned way. I actually worked my way through college.
Yeah.
And when I graduated, had no college debt.
Right. It's just, and I bet you got through it. I bet you got through it in 4 years too.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
The good old days. People don't understand
Went
that
back
today.
and got a teaching credential back in '76, and graduated in '76, and there was no jobs in Santa Barbara for teachers, particularly English history teacher. So I went into real estate.
So you taught a little bit?
I did. I worked as a substitute teacher, and I worked as an intern at Galena Valley and at DP.
And the family said, "We need you to help us build our business."
Yeah. At one point, there was a time I worked for my dad, and I was one of the first salespeople he had. And then my older brother came on board. He kind of took over. I went back to get my credential. And then when I graduated, the company really wasn't ready for another salesperson, so I actually went and decided to go into real estate instead. And
that was in the
'77.
mid-'70s?
Yeah.
And I hadn't
worked for a little company called Eddie Road Realty.
Yeah.
It was on State Street. There's a nail salon
nice
there now.
Guy. Eddie,
yeah, very nice guy.
I was in the business then too, and when I kept falling into the evil way of politics, running different campaigns, Lagomarsino, McGilvery, Catherland, I ran 7 campaigns. People say, how has this county turned so blue and so left wing? And I said, well, I ran 7 campaigns and won 6, and the 7th I lost because I was a candidate and I was a bad candidate.
It is remarkable to think that back there in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, that Santa Barbara was a red county.
Yeah.
And the predominant influence was conservative ideas, and the way that the county was being managed as by Republicans. But now it's almost like you're afraid to go down State Street and say you're Republican.
Yeah.
People in business
not me, but yeah.
Not me. But there are people that are afraid that it's going to hurt their business if people know that they're Republican.
One of the damages done by progressives, and mainly the Democrat Party, but Republicans have fallen into, is the aura of fear, teaching people to be afraid of living, whether it be their politics, their health, the pandemic. We all have to live in fear, and
somehow big government's going to save you.
Yeah,
and that's just not turning out to be true.
No.
And I really do think that there's been kind of a flip-flop here, where the Republican Party is now the party of the working class, the middle class, the small businesses. We are not the party of the big tech companies. They have all supporting the Dems.
I worked briefly with Assemblyman when he was running, former supervisor Brooks Firestone, and we laughed about, I think it was Reagan who said, the most terrifying thing you can hear is, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." And Brooks pointed out the window and he says, when a white car parks out there, we were on the 2nd floor, he just built a winery. When a white car parks out there and a guy in a suit with a clipboard gets out, I know I'm in trouble. Even though I didn't do anything wrong, the guy's from the government.
But there's been a shift, and we're wondering how deep and broad the shift is going to be. Like apparently the AP, the Gallup polls came out and said there's been a shift, 47% of Democrats now say they're going to be voting Republican, or some number like that, huge number. That's why there's been this talk of a tidal wave.
That poll has always been 39% Republican to, in a wave election of 94, 43% Republican, and it's sitting at 47 now and growing. That leads to what we'd like people to do. If they want to send a message and they're a Democrat, they've got to re-register Republican, or at least leave the Democratic Party for a couple of years to send the message they're not with this wonky.
Yeah, people don't realize that if you're a declined estate, you are sitting on the sidelines. You don't get to vote in the primary for the partisan, for the people who represent different parties. So if they really want their vote to count, they really need to change parties and come to the Republican Party. And I'm telling people that, hey, you may not agree with us 100% of the time, but if you're agreeing with us 70% of the time, let's take California back. Let's go back to a two-party state.
Right.
Let's push back
Send
on
a
all
message.
these progressive policies. And it's so easy to be able to re-register. You just go to the county elections office, and it has right on there, check your registration, and you can change it right on your computer from the comfort of your home.
So much easier. I love to tell the story of a man I met in my first campaign. He was running for DA, and he beat an incumbent DA. Worked with him with legislation when I was working for the state senator in Sacramento. Came back, and he was ushering at my church, and his young son John was in my second grade class, and we became close friends, did some real estate together, and he came up for re-election. And he says, will you run my campaign? Will you work with me? I said, no. He said, why? I said, you're a Democrat. I've never supported a Democrat. If you don't have good enough sense to, he said, well, what do I do? I said, come with me. And we walked across the courthouse to the office of County Clerk Jack Lewis, and Jack Lewis swore him in as a Republican. You got to do that with if you really like other people,
but
and they have the same philosophy.
Today it is so easy to change your registration, and people should all look at their registration, because the DMV is registering everybody. When you renew your license, you're renewing your registration. They often get you in the wrong party, or they often will put you as declined estate as your party preference. So check your party registration, and it's very easy to do. I believe I sent you guys the link where people can go ahead and check their registration.
They need to, because the third biggest party in our county and in the state is the American Independent Party, which we used to call the Apes, and it was a very right-wing, nice people, but Birch Society, right-wing conservative party. Well, it isn't.
Most of those people think that they're registering as an independent, and the no party preference, and they're not.
And there's 30,000 in this county.
And so those people would be ideal to have them register our party, right? And if you are a no party preference, and you are leaning 70%, you're tired of this progressive woke ideology, defund the police, defund the sheriff department. The best way for them to fight back is to vote Republican, vote for our party. Yeah, you may not agree with all of the entire party platform, but I, as the chair, I have a broad tent. I want to invite more people in. We have pro-choice people involved in our party. We have pro-life people involved with our party. And I don't like the way the Democrats have taken control of our county and of our state simply on the issue of pro-life or pro-choice.
A longtime patriot in our party who's just recently moved to Ventura but still has his office in Carpinteria is proudly gay. And he's the state treasurer of the Republican Party.
Yeah, my mentor too.
And he ends and you've picked it up, every communication with in Patriot.
In Liberty.
In Liberty, yeah.
In Liberty.
Patriot in Liberty, yeah.
And that's what the Republican Party is all about, for individual liberty and freedom. We don't want big government coming in to help you. We want big government to stay out of our way. Let the marketplace take care of the people. Let the people take care of themselves. Parents should have the right to decide if their child gets a vaccine or not a school district. Did you know, Jim, there's a bill that just passed that said 12-year-olds can decide to get the vaccine without their parents' permission? I don't know if the governor signed it, but that's outrageous.
Well, being pro-life, that's like the scandal of the 15, 16-year-old girl who goes to Planned Parenthood pregnant, doesn't tell her parents, and they don't report that rape, which it is, and they are obligated to report it when they find out that it was a 30-year-old man. And, you know, it's interesting how when it suits the progressive leftist controls, they start throwing out the rules. And when it doesn't, you're going to lose your job for not getting a vaccination.
Well, it's really ironic. I mean, my husband and I both got the vaccines. And our family's been divided about the vaccines. We have some that are really cautious and they're careful what they do, and they all been vaccinated. And then we have others in our family that are fighting the vaccine, will not get the vaccine, fighting to hold on to their jobs, in danger of losing their job because they won't get the vaccine.
Is she a nurse?
Yes, she's a nurse.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, she's taking care of hundreds of COVID patients. She said she feels this is an overreach of government. All of these vaccinations are experimental, and they are. And if Biden administration removes the emergency, then all of them go back to the state where they have not done the full 5 years of vetting of these vaccinations, and to be giving them to young children before they've been properly vetted, I think is a big mistake. Well, and we all know people who have had real vaccine injury. So I'm not against the vaccine. I'm against government mandating it.
Right.
And remember, people, mandates are not laws. You know, Joe Biden says a mandate, people think and companies think that that's a law. It's not a law.
It immediately made me not want to do it.
Right, exactly.
But we are finding that the COVID vaccine is really like the flu shot. And we don't mandate flu shots.
Right.
And it has about the same success rate on the variations of 40% effectiveness. We've known that about flu shots for 20 years. They're
right.
40% effective.
And that's why it's always been optional.
Yeah.
And never been. And this does not feel like this is about health anymore. It feels like it's about power and control of the individuals.
Yeah, and
you notice that America today was listed 26th on the freedom list of democracies because we have so many mandates controlling our lives.
26 out?
Yeah, 26 out of a list of, I guess it was
probably below Russia.
We're not below Russia, but the countries that are ahead of us are Switzerland's at the top, Denmark, all the countries that have opened up, Ireland. All of those countries are ahead of us on freedoms for their people. Yeah. And we've lost freedom. And the fact that the Navy SEALs just won 2 days ago a case against the Biden administration, they cannot mandate the vaccination because it takes away their First Amendment right. And there's nothing that should get in the way of our rights that are given to us by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I had a Navy SEAL ask me this question just recently. Let me pose it to you. He said, how is it that a Navy SEAL who decides he wants to change his gender from male to female is allowed to go through all these medical procedures and able to stay as part of the military, and you're telling me I have to be dismissed because I won't get a vaccination that I think I don't need? I don't want to have that medical procedure in my body?
Well, another part of what's happened, and our friend the investigator has exposed some of it in the news press, and that is the incredible side effects. Last I saw, 3,000 young men between 12 and 30 developed and died of heart problems that they'd never had, never been diagnosed. And it's attributed to the vaccination in their particular. That's why don't trust Fauci, the communist.
Fauci.
Yeah.
It's not about science. This is about control.
It's about see your doctor, deal with your doctor. Before I got my vaccinations, I said to him, now, what if I still get this? Do we have monoclonal, can I get that thing that the president was touting, and all of a sudden people are saying, yeah, that does work, after they pilloried him. It is about freedom, and we see it in more.
And the other thing, it's about money. Who is making money? I was thinking about it. I thought, oh my gosh, if my dad was alive today, he would have Pactuco making masks, because masks are being distributed like crazy all over the country, right?
Big pharma. Big pharma. And I'm told, it's anecdotal, but I've heard it in person by doctors up in Santa Maria, doctors here, and in the media, that hospitals identify someone with COVID because the difference is about $30,000 a person they're treating coming from the government.
Right.
So if you go in and you've got a respiratory problem like the flu, if they can say with COVID, the hospitals are making a heck of a lot more money.
I've also heard, I don't know if it's true, but doctors are receiving bonuses for every person who takes the remdesivir as the treatment when they get in the hospital. Well, but I don't know if that's true or not.
I've always, all along, because of the anecdotal evidence was so great, the guy who was killed in a motorcycle accident and he died of COVID.
Right.
And the CDC, just that strange-looking woman who is the head of the CDC, was asked a question 3 weeks ago. How many of the cases are with COVID, not from COVID, of the deaths? So I'll have to check that. She did, and honestly came back and she said, our statistics show that 75% of the deaths are with COVID, not from COVID.
Right. I've heard that.
We're talking about 8 million people. We're saying maybe 160,000 died from COVID. And I say, maybe a lot of those didn't know they had an underlying,
condition.
Right. So.
Well, and there's no one is saying that it's not a nasty bug. Some people, they get it and it's very mild. Others get it and they are just the worst thing they've ever gone through.
Our gay friend Greg almost
died. Right.
Yeah, he was in the hospital for
6 weeks.
Yeah, and we know it's dangerous.
Yeah.
I tell people I had the real flu once.
Right.
In 1958, freshman in college, and I missed a month of school, sick as a dog, vomiting, diarrhea, everything. The worst flu epidemic in '58 since the Spanish flu till today. I lost 20 pounds, and so I know when people are worried about the flu, I know what the flu can do.
Right.
But it only did it once in 100 years,
Well, and the other thing about the vaccinations is, and the anti-vax, is that this is not a partisan issue. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. People on both sides of the aisle are going, hey, this is overreach of government. We need to get government out of health care. It's given way too much power to the CDC. And then it's the Democratic governors who are not willing to let go, except for Colorado, who's not willing to let go of the emergency powers they have.
Yeah.
And that is what is driving me. What is so special about February 16th? That we're all of a sudden California doesn't have to wear masks inside anymore.
Unless the county decides.
But what is so special about that date? I mean, it makes no sense. It will be after the Super Bowl, but as you know, the governor was at the Rams and the Rams and 49er game without a mask on, with Magic Johnson without a mask on.
And Magic Johnson has stringent underlying AIDS.
Right.
But the funny part of that was he said, well, it was just to take the picture. And then the next shot from the Obitron or whatever was the 30 or 40 people in that skybox.
Nobody had a mask on. So the governor is really a great one for telling us what to do, but he doesn't even follow his own mandates, his own orders. It's an overreach of government.
If he was a little heavier, and I didn't want to be a person who damaged a nice animal, I'd call him a hippopotamus.
Oh my gosh.
So let's get off of COVID. Let's start talking about.
But I think COVID has had a big impact on what's going to happen in this next election.
Yeah, and some of the
mandates.
Yeah, and the next thing where our freedom has been taken away is where the teachers' unions and the teacher bureaucrats have decided what they're going to teach our children, whether we like it or not. The critical race theory. And
teen talk.
Pitting at a very young age children against each other based on apparent racial differences. You know, it's horrible to be a dark-skinned Pakistani and being treated like you're a black man in America, and your children being taught that way. Not that race isn't a problem, but it runs more than one way. Mm-hmm. It's the wonk media hides things like the FBI report, the attacks on Chinese in the last 2 years. That was because of Trump calling it the Wuhan. No, it was black men attacking and killing Chinese, mainly older women. 85%, according to the FBI, of the attacks, racial attacks on Orientals were young black men.
What about the attacks of black on blacks?
Yeah.
Look what's happening
Horrible.
in Chicago. Why is no one doing anything? The National Guard should be sent into the inner city of Chicago. And
Trump offered it and they turned it down.
I know, it just doesn't make sense because those people are, what was it, 3,500 people were murdered and they're 5-year-olds and they're children. I mean, it's not safe to go and play in the streets in Chicago.
I'm safe from racial warfare because I'm not a young black man. If I was a young black man, I would be in danger of that other group of young black men. That's a tragedy. It has a lot to do with the war on drugs, has a lot to do with a lack of men, full parenthood, taking their responsibility, and a lack of the government doing anything except accentuating that.
Well, and rewarding mothers for being single and having babies out of wedlock.
Yeah.
And I think that's still going on today.
Well, you know, that has happened and it's grown, the illegitimate birth, if you want to call it that, but that's the statistic it's used, has grown in the white population too. But the government in our welfare system, up until welfare reform, required that the man who was the father of the child couldn't be there. He couldn't live there. And so it went from, okay, he couldn't live there, another man came, now there was a second child and he couldn't live there. And so women were given, and not just black, poor whites were given money for, and Native Americans were given money based upon the child in the house and not the whole household. They broke up the whole households.
I think I've heard Dr. Carson say that the single most important thing for a family not to live in poverty is for the parents to graduate from high school before they start having children.
Yeah. Now, I hope the message is getting through that we believe freedom and fighting against government overreach is where the Republican Party is alone, and we want everybody to join us in that battle against big pharma, big education, big medicine.
Big tech.
Big taxes, yeah.
Big tech, where the tech companies have gotten way too big and way too influential and way too much control. The fact that they're able to do censorship that a book publishing company can't do is just beyond me.
Oh, Facebook just this last week.
Facebook's responsible for getting Biden into office.
Yeah, Facebook this last week, the GoFundMe section got $10 million contributed by people all over the country and Canada to support the Canadian truckers.
Right.
They decided that that wasn't fair, and so they grabbed that $10 million and said they were going to give it to some of their charities. They've been sued by, at the last I saw, 5 attorney generals in the United States claiming that's theft of different states.
I didn't realize GoFundMe was connected to Facebook.
YouTube and Facebook, yeah.
I did not realize that.
And so let's talk about upcoming races.
Yeah.
Because we have an election that has really started. First of all, let's talk about who's up for election. Well, first, let's explain what the Republican Party is. There is an election code section for each party. And the people who are in that party are people who were elected at the presidential election every 4 years.
Right.
You had to circulate a petition and
Right.
run, and you barely won. I think you may have come ahead of me. You run by supersavorial districts. You
Right.
have to go out and get at least 30 other people in your party to sign and say you should be on the ballot. And then you go on the ballot and you're elected. And so the 21 members of the Republican Central Committee, the governing body under state law of the Republican Party in Santa Barbara County, were elected or replaced somebody who was elected if they left the county.
Right.
And the 5 people who ran for constitutional offices, Andy Caldwell, who ran for
Congress,
who got the Republican nomination.
Jordan Cunningham, Gary Michaels,
Gary Michaels in the Senate.
Charlie Cole.
Yeah, Charlie Cole in the Assembly. And there's one more. Who am I missing? Anyway, they are ex-official members, and they serve until another Republican is the nominee for that office.
Right.
So Andy Caldwell, by June, he's not running for Congress. He will step aside, and whoever gets the Republican nomination in Congress will have their place on the Central Committee. The Central Committee is the only legal body to speak for the Republican Party.
Correct.
Now, we have some fantastic, I was at a luncheon 2 weeks ago, the Republican Club. Fuller's the president, and there were 60 people there for lunch to hear a speaker. We have a young Republican, we have a college Republican, we have Santa Maria, we have a variety of volunteer organizations.
Right.
They can speak for themselves, but they can't speak for the party.
Exactly.
So I want to make that clear.
Right.
Now, upcoming is an election for
the primary, June 7th
for
primary.
the state offices,
right,
and the federal office. People don't understand that technically our county officials, from sheriff down to board of supervisors, are state offices. Santa Barbara County only exists as a organ of the state, just like the Highway Patrol.
Right.
Each county is a organ of the state. That's why it gets very frustrating when the state starts moving money around and your county supervisors say, no, don't take our money. And the state says, no, it's not your money. We decide where it goes. I know Mike Stoker used to go crazy over that, and other supervisors. So we have, starting with governor,
and lieutenant governor, and there's a whole host of
the 2 U.S. Senate seats.
Yes.
Explain how that happened.
Well, because Kamala Harris was elected as vice president, she appointed Alex Padilla to finish out her term, and because we have an election,
he was appointed by Newsom.
By Newsom,
Yeah.
exactly.
So she'll.
So whoever wins, if Alex Padilla loses that election come November, and there's a Republican or another person who takes his place, then they don't wait until January to take office. They take office the next day.
For seniority, they run in and they will only have a 2-year term.
That's right.
And now the 6-year term is up.
Right.
And that also was appointed, and I can't remember why it was vacant, but that senator was appointed, wasn't he?
Well, I think what it is that Alex Padilla's seat, which he was appointed to finish out Kamala Harris's term, is for the short term, those first few months. Then the second seat is her seat that's now vacant, that someone will take it over for 6 years.
Okay.
So that's why candidate like Mark Moiser, he's our endorsed candidate for U.S. Senate. He's actually going to be on the ballot twice. Once as the person to take over from Alex Padilla starting November 9th, but also to win the seat that's going to be vacated in January.
So
that's my understanding anyway.
So we have 2 senators on the ballot. We'll have a lieutenant governor.
Right.
We'll have Secretary of Education. We'll have
the controller, state
controller. That's an important office in that he is one of 3 votes on the not coastal commission, the people that oversee our coastline, oil, and everything.
That's the Coastal Commission, yeah. I didn't realize that, but yeah.
And
it's also important because he's going to be like a watchdog over how the governor, lieutenant governor, how they're all spending money, and is it being distributed properly? Like, you know, in the state of California, the PPE money, for example, that came out because of COVID, a lot of that didn't make it into the right hands.
Yeah. Then there'll be treasurer.
There'll be treasurer, right?
And there are 5 Board of Equalization, the people that move the tax collection around and make sure it's properly. And I think 2 of the 5 are up, and I don't know I think we're not in a district that's up, but there's that.
There's District 2 and District 5 for Board of Supervisors are up.
Yeah. Again.
Right.
Board of Supervisors.
Right.
Pardon me.
All of the city council races, school board races, airport, sanitation, water districts, they will all be on the ballot in November.
Yeah, the people can file for those in August after the June primary.
I believe it opens up in July, and that the cutoff for the November election is August 12th. And the cutoff for the June primary is March 11th.
Yeah, so we have we have a congressional seat open, and in the redistricting of the state, we ended up with an open assembly seat.
Right.
That's got a sliver, 15,000 residents in San Luis County, and all of Santa Barbara County will have an assemblyman, and that's open. Now, both in the fair redistricting, which hasn't been fair, both the congressional seat and the assembly seat, the Democrats have about an 18% voter registration lead, which would be very safe except for the wave.
Yes, the red wave.
The wave is coming.
In fact, that we're hoping that people like you decline to states, and even some of you Democrats are going to switch parties and vote for some common sense government. Because that's the way we can bring common sense back to California, is by electing people from the opposition party, which is the Republican Party.
Particularly when you know now that you're not going to vote for those Democrat
SOBs.
Register now. Don't wait till you get your ballot.
Yeah. Re-register now so you can vote in the primary.
Yeah.
And then because you for the party offices, partisan offices, you have to be registered to a party to be able to vote in that.
Okay, now we, as I say, we have the congressional seats. We've named just about all of the larger seats, but we also start with very important offices that are county offices. Again, controlled
Right.
very much by the election code of the state, because they're state. And then the ones we
sheriff.
think of are sheriff, district attorney,
Right.
and
We have the treasurer, and the auditor.
probably the most important one, other than sheriff and district attorney, the superintendent of public instruction.
Right.
The person who hasn't stopped the critical race theory and the teaching of our children to hate each other but based on their skin color,
Right.
or religion, or
Right.
sex. I mean, the
Right.
list of reasons to hate each other is
It's incredible.
really long and very confusing.
Right.
I mean, I'd hate to
In fact,
be.
you should do a show on it. Christy Lozano is a teacher who has recently, she was on Laura Ingraham last night, and she is exposing the private portal, which shows exactly the curriculum being taught by the school district. The school district's not happy about it, but she would make a great person for you to interview.
Yeah, they should. None of this should be secret.
It
and
should not. I
it
think
was
it's against the law for it to be
across
secret.
the United States. It was very secret until parents would be at home and see what their third grader was doing on Zoom.
Right.
And the classic is a little black girl who said, "What am I? Daddy's a white policeman. Do I hate him? I'm black. Do I have to hate everybody that's white, or are people going to hate me because I'm black?" I mean, just really confusing for these children.
Right.
And and I'm a Christian, and you're a terrible person.
They're not teaching the Martin Luther King
No.
philosophy. This is indoctrination.
Well,
It's not education. And what's happened to the schools, the results of them doing all this social education, if you will, is that the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, those are being lost in the shuffle. And who is that really hurting? It's hurting those kids. It's hurting their chances to get to move on in life. When you graduate from high school, if you can't read on grade level, you can't do math on grade level, you're going to have a much harder time being able to be successful out in the world. So
Well,
that's what's really, in addition to the conflicts it's creating on campus among the different races of kids, it's hurting all the kids because they're not teaching them, giving them the tools they need to be successful in the real world, in real life.
Yeah, it's back to that evil term that the progressives, the wonkers like, and that's equity. Not equality, equity.
It's equality of
Let's make everybody
opportunity.
outcome the same.
Right.
Well, then nobody excels, and people don't have to fear failure, which is the greatest motivation to a bright person in the world. You know, they study like.
You're watching the Olympics this week. You watched Nathan Chen last night won the Olympic gold, and they showed him as a young boy becoming an ice skater. When he was like 10, he said, "I'll be at the 2018 Olympics." He told us, one commentator, and he was at the 2018 Olympics. But guess what? He came in 5th. He didn't win. So what did he do? He went back and worked hard, came back at and came back to this year's Olympics, and he won the gold medal. It was the only medal he hadn't won yet. He'd won all these first place around the world, the number one the ice skater in the world, and it just shows you that had he quit after that first Olympics, okay, I'm an Olympian, I'll just quit, he would never have had the gold medal around his neck last night.
These offices now, people were able to start taking out papers for them, and the reason for that is if you gather signatures, you have less of a fee,
Right.
and you have time before you make your final declaration that you're running for that office.
So I believe it's the February 16th is the deadline for the signatures be turned in, some date like that.
And the final filing date
Is March 11th.
Yeah, so
On most of these.
between turning in signatures of the 16th to
March 11th.
you can come along and write a check for $1,800 or
Right.
your campaign can.
Right.
There is a provision when there is no incumbent, in a race, like there is in the assembly race, for an automatic extension of 5 days, isn't it?
I have not been able to determine that the 5 days is for the assembly race, but in general, there's a 5-day extension.
In other races where, like the 2nd District Supervisor, where he's running for a higher office.
There'll probably be a 5-day extension there as well. Yeah.
So
very likely.
We're wide open right now for anybody who wants to contact you, contact me.
There's also on the website, I know I sent the link to go to the county elections office. It's countyofsb.org/elections. And on their website, they have a place that says candidate filing and also what positions are becoming open, what seats are being open. I noticed they didn't have the November seats yet listed. I think that's because of all the redistricting going on. But they have the ones for the June 7th primary.
Yeah, it'd be very confusing to be throwing in school districts and water districts and stuff now.
Right.
We have a couple of sites where people can see more and more why and how they can participate in the party. If Michael put up Wave, it's
the Wave is our newsletter.
Yeah, it goes out every week. Has a lot of links to other items that have been kind of vetted by 2 or 3 people on the Central Committee. Give our 5.
It's a 5-people communications committee, of which you're one member.
Oh, I am?
Yes, you are. And actually, the newsletter goes out once a week, and it's there. We did the newsletter to highlight things that are happening around the county.
Do you have the banner for that, Mike?
The Wave?
If you do, put it up. That's one way. The other
Other way is you can go on the SantaBarbaraGOP.org and you can sign up for the newsletter. That's a banner that comes up as you enter our website.
And you can be on our email list, which and you can always access our website, which is. What's the website?
SantaBarbaraGOP.org.
SantaBarbaraGOP.org. Now again, we're not claiming that title out of hubris. We're claiming that title because that's what the state law.
Yeah, we are the legal entity and the legal arm of the Santa Barbara Republican Party.
So you encourage people who are thinking about it to contact you.
Yes, please.
And you will, some you'll have me talk to, some. Ed Fuller is very active on our committee, and he's the chairman of.
We have people in every caucus around the county that are actively looking for candidates, because we have a lot of seats that are opening up in Lompoc and Santa Maria, Santa Ynez. So each of the caucuses, which is basically based upon the members of our committee that belong to a certain district, they're looking for qualified people to be able to run for the offices.
Yeah, we forgot to mention that not only are we governed by the state law, we are divided into
5
supervisorial districts by the state law and by the governor's race. It's reapportioned based upon the previous governor's race.
And not the recall election, but the governor's race.
Yeah. And so that caucus meets and interviews people, and right now we've had in our 2nd District caucus, we've had a young lady with a great life story, who intends to run for Congress, we believe.
Right.
And at least she's moved in that direction. At our Central Committee meeting, we've had a gentleman who's a
businessman,
prominent businessman. You'll see his equipment around the tri-counties.
Yeah. They're not ready for us to announce their names because they're in the process of putting their team together, and we want to let them make their own announcement.
Yeah.
But we do have a couple people who want to run for Congress.
And I always hope for that one-legged, blind, billionaire veteran who will jump in and win our congressional seat.
Right.
That's not cruel.
But I think the assembly race...
Not cruel, folks. We have Republican veterans who don't have any legs. We have one who doesn't have one of his eyes, and they've won their races. And I say, well, that works.
Well, the other thing is this year, the assembly race, because it's a completely new configuration of a district, it gives us an opportunity, a real opportunity to be able to put someone up there to run. Greg Hart right now is the leader for that race. He's the one who is
Who?
Greg Hart, the
that's the guy who
supervisor.
Mealy Mouth Hart.
Yeah, well, he's the guy that voted to defund the sheriff department by $47 million or $27 million. He is not someone we want to be sending to Sacramento.
I've known him. He's always been a bureaucrat. He worked for this.
He and Doss Williams, they both voted to defund the sheriff department by $27 million. Bill Brown stood up to them, argued it, and thank goodness Joan Hartman was convinced to support the sheriff department and not defund them.
Yeah, it's a time of, we have been fairly lucky in this county, lack of crime, although I witnessed grab and run at CVS in Goleta. Some guy, I laughed and hoped that he got knocked down. He ran into the sliding door, running out with some stolen goods.
Stuff. Wow.
And so we aren't immune to it, and in our North County we're not immune to a lot of violence.
Yeah, there were 4 shootings last week.
Gangs.
And then here in Santa Barbara, it's unsafe for the waitresses to be able to get, when they get off their shifts at work at night, to be walking downtown by themselves. And so it is, we definitely have a security issue here. I was really pleased that Randy Rouse won as mayor.
Yeah,
I really think that that's going to turn the progressive influence away from the city council, but he's got a huge fight on his hand because he did not get Barrett Reed or Jason Carlton to be on that city council with him.
We're lucky that we have a very professional interim police chief with an understaffed police department in Santa Barbara, but very professional and doing their best to cover the territory, short 19 sworn officers. Their spokesperson, Ragsdale, is fantastic and very respectful of everyone. He even is nice to me. That's always the criteria. If a government official is nice to me, they're either crazy or a good person. Bobbi, we didn't get through all of it. Last word.
Please don't sit on the fence, decline to state. Make a choice. Choose Republican. Vote against the progressive Democrats. They are ruining our state.
As the people did in Virginia, almost did in New Jersey, did in great sections of New York in the special by-elections, and there was a swing of 11 to 15% in registration. In other words, 11 to 15% of the Democrats voted Republican. We can only hope for more here in the red wave.
Please, we need a red wave. Help us. Great.